Welcome back to another episode of the Mile 40 podcast. Today's episode is extremely unique because today's episode truly embodies the pit to peak trajectory. Today, I'd like to introduce you all to Sara Kafka. Sara recently filmed a documentary where she and 3 other women who had never met in person climbed Mount Kilimanjaro together. Sara is currently pursuing a degree in medicine. She's going to tell us the whole backstory. She's actually still finishing up pre-med right now and plans to be taking her MCAT soon. This is all going to become very relevant to the narrative as we dive in. So let me just get straight to it. Thank you for joining me today, Sara.
Thanks for having me.
So in your bio, it said Sara was born into a storm.
Yeah.
And I don't know where else to begin. So let's just start there. I know that, you came from a rough beginning. So let's start there and let's learn a little bit about how things got going.
Yeah. I was the youngest of, I'm the third girl, but I was the baby. And my older 2 sisters had a different dad than I did. And so when I was younger, there was just like a lot going on, but you're a kid and you don't really, your ideas of the world are forming. So you're not really sure what is appropriate and what's not appropriate. And so I basically don't remember the majority of my childhood. In school or in life, there's constantly the icebreaker of like, what's your first memory? And I have none. And when I was 8 years old, I remember someone knocking on a door and access to the house that we didn't use very often. And my dad asked me who it was, and it was a bunch of police officers, and they came in and arrested my father. And that was basically the last time I saw him. And, flash forward, it turns out that he was a serial sexual predator. And that's really, in my mind, in my cognitive space, where my life kind of really begins, because from that point forward is really like what I remember.
Got it. And you had shared with me that your mother was the one that turned him in?
Yeah. So, and it's hard to talk about because it's not just my story. This affects so many people. And it's something, I knew we were recording this podcast today. It's something that I've really been thinking about because, this happened when I was a child, and this thing that's happened in my life, I've never spent more time talking about it than I have in the last year. And it's really weird because when you survive sexual abuse and sexual assault, you have this fight for autonomy within yourself, like bodily autonomy. But it's even more weird when it happens in your family, that you almost feel like you don't have autonomy of your story, or like autonomy of your memories, or like the autonomy to share almost. And so it's like you're fighting for it on another level. And so it's a hard thing to talk about because, my family members are still around. But he was a photographer for a local newspaper, and he documented his abuse of the girls. And my mother found that documentation and turned him into the police. And so, not only does she have to deal with the fact that she married a man who essentially ruined her children, but she was the one that saw the evidence of it and had to turn him in. So.
Wow. I'm going to give that just a minute to kind of sink in, because it's really, you talk about the battle of autonomy of your own body and even owning the pieces of the story, because it's not just your story. Um, and as the interviewer in my seat right now, you know, I have so many emotions running through me because number one, I want to thank you for your continued bravery and continued dialogue and the fact that, you know, again, from my seat, I know this is very difficult for you. And I'm also thinking of anyone out there who's potentially listening who's gone through a similar trauma who probably is really thanking you right now for your bravery. Um, and at the same time, um, I'm just so proud of you because I know how this story goes from here. And so, you know, to all the listeners out there, I know I might sound like I'm getting a little emotional right now, but I kind of want to make sure that I direct you properly. So it's not like a, okay, and then what happened type of part of the story. Because I'm sure that there was some aftermath. You know, there was probably some explanations that your mother had to give to you and your sisters. And then there was probably a period of transition to whatever the next kind of normal in your life looked like. So, can we talk about the immediate aftermath of what you can recall from that period?
Because he was a photographer, it was a pretty big deal, and it was on news channels. And I remember my mom pulling me out of school for a while. And I also remember some of the really close friends that I had as a kid, they were no longer allowed to play with me anymore. And there was a huge transition. I, moved in with my mom. It's very common with women who go through divorces to have a devastating financial change, which is what we experienced. And, I think we were all trying to process what had happened. But I think over the next few years, through my teenage years, it really took a toll on my mom, and our relationship shifted so much. And, she had so much anger inside of her. And as an adult now, like, I can understand, like, obviously you would have a ton of anger. But as a kid, when you're searching for some kind of stability and some kind of safety, and your parent is angry or absent, you don't understand it. And so all you can do really is learn how to really just like survive on your own. And that's basically what I did. They like to make fun of me because, and like in jest, not to like, talk badly about me or whatever. But my sister was much older than me. And I remember there was a boy who came over to take her out on a date. And he had mentioned like, either he had been drinking or they were going to go drinking. And I stood in front of the door with a baseball bat, not letting him leave with my sister until my mom came home, and that was like my role. I was like the adult,
Wow.
As like a 10-year-old kid trying to protect my sister from, the ways of the world. And so there definitely was a large transition, but I don't think it's the transition that people think. People maybe think like 6 months, a year, but it really, I think even that transition's still happening. I have a very different relationship with my mother now. Thankfully, it's such a sacred relationship, but it took a really long time for us to get there. And so, I think we're all still just transitioning from that.
Got it. How would you say your experience has impacted your overall ability to love yourself? I mean, look, I don't know if there was ever a period where you held yourself accountable for anyone else's mistakes. Um, but did you have trouble given the fact that, things began to get isolating for you, and that, there was almost really nowhere to turn? I mean, that's the picture that I'm seeing right now. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, one of the, I think, greatest gifts that happened to me because of this whole situation was, um, I'm not sure if it was the policy of the state of Florida where it happened, or if it was my mother, or both, but I was placed into therapy immediately, like immediately, and for years. And I am 8 years old. My brain is physically changing and developing and encoding information. And during this time in my life, that's when your sense of self starts to develop. And I'm doing this in a safety setting, learning how to communicate, learning how to explore my feelings. And so that was really a gift that has given me so much, I think, power, but also tools, and tools in the business world that people don't have,
Yeah,
mind you.
absolutely.
Um, and so I grew up, um, really knowing my power, really being protective, of having like a stark knowledge of what is right and what is wrong. Um, and it was hard. I'm sure we'll get into it later, but I didn't get to go to college because I didn't have an adult in my life. I didn't have anyone overseeing me to be like, you need to take a language class, you need to do SAT preps. I never took the SAT. So I didn't have an adult in that sense, but I was aware enough to survive and, to recognize in relationships when they were not healthy. And I was not interested in that. I had a long-term boyfriend who treated me amazingly. And that was the one thing I always said: I will never be with a man who resembles anyone of the past that I have seen. I won't do it. And
Yeah,
so I really didn't struggle with self-love until, I think, the last few years. And I think that was really part of like my breaking process. Cause for the first time I was like, I don't know who the hell I am. And that's a hard thing to question in your mid 30s.
absolutely. I mean, you talk about the power of being put in therapy at a very young age, and can I ask, have you gone to therapy at an older age?
I not really. I've just started recently, to deal with, some of the school stuff.
Mhm.
Um, but other than, I went for such a long time when I was a kid,
Yeah.
that a lot of those tools really stick with you.
Can you talk a little bit from what you remember around, um, maybe the safety it provided to go to therapy back then?
Mm. Yeah, just to know that I was with an adult, just to know that you're with an adult. Like, I can relax a little bit. I can trust that someone's going to take the reins. And, you know, I can explore how I'm doing and how I'm feeling without impacting someone else's mental space. I think that
Yeah.
was the other thing as a kid, is like, I I was always so aware of the chaos around me that I never felt like I could add to it. I had to tame the chaos and put my stuff aside, and I think when I made the shift in my life to shift, that was part of it. It was like, I'm so tired of surviving. I'm so tired of surviving. I just want to live. And And so I think that's where that safety was, is like I could express and do those things without harming other people.
Was that perhaps one of the only areas of your childhood and adolescence where you felt like you were living a normal life, as much as, it may be perceived that you were in that circumstance because of an abnormal situation? Like, do you recall any period of, between childhood and the age of 18 or 20 where life felt normal? Or was it always kind of a no?
No, no. I mean,
No, and that's fair. And that's fair. I appreciate the transparency here. And I had a feeling that was going to be the answer, but I really want to paint a picture for the listeners out there. We've had people on the show where a certain incident happens, or one incident happens after the other, and there's still pockets of normalcy. And in your situation, it was different because you had an entire decade, more than a decade, essentially blacked out or erased, because of your circumstances. You alluded to the fact that like no one was there to tell you to take a test or to take your SATs or to take a foreign language. And I know that your education was heavily impacted upon this. And, we're going to come full circle with regards to what you're pursuing now and how you got there. But let's paint a little bit of a picture around that. So you didn't graduate high school, right? And
I did.
you did graduate high school, barely. Okay. So you barely graduated high school. What happened right after high school? Were you just thrown into the working world?
I was fortunate enough I was going to performing arts high school,
Okay.
and I was in the theater program, not because it was something that like I was particularly passionate about, but it was because like my mom really wanted me to do it.
Yeah.
And when all of my friends, started applying to colleges, and I was like, oh, cool, like I'm going to do that. And then I found out like that is not a thing you're able to do. A acting conservatory in New York saw one of my performances, and they recruited me to come to New York City with a scholarship here. And so obviously I was like,
That's awesome.
want to get the F out. So let's go.
Can I ask what kind of performance it was?
Yeah, it was acting specifically for film and television.
Awesome.
And it's still a school here. Yeah. So I did that for a while.
Okay. So then you were at the conservatory. And then what happened?
So when my mom drove me to the airport to like go to this school, I think she handed me like $20 and was like, you better get a job right away. And she dropped me off at the airport. And I remember just like feeling devastated, like it wasn't like care or concern or support. I was on my own again. And it was very clear, like, you better get a job as soon as you land, because this is all you have. I'd never taken a taxi before, like I'm now trying to figure all this out. So I got a job. And when you come from having no money and you get a job and you're like, wait, I can make money come in. It's like, it's
a game changer.
A game changer. And everything else becomes secondary, because now it's like survival on the next level, And so that's what I did. I worked around New York City. Unfortunately, like the sexual assault thing followed me for many years. I think when you survive something like that, it's almost like predators are drawn to you. It's almost like they can sense you in a crowd. And, I had to deal with that for a long time. I got stalked at work when I worked in Grand Central, and the police had to come in and like arrest this guy. And so it was a lot. Eventually I ended up back in Florida. and I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I got a job at a local Aveda salon, and I was in my early 20s. And I was like, you know what? Like, I know how to talk to people, and I'm noticing people around me don't know how to do that. Like, I think I could be a leader. And they were like, no, you're young. Like, and I bought every business book I could find. I read every single page. I worked my butt off. And within the next year, I was promoted to management. And before I knew it, I was like a store leader for multiple locations. And so I was really like, I have a knack for this, and I can secure my own survival. And that's what I'm going to do. And I really spent the next few years just like grinding away at my career. And eventually, yeah.
Eventually, no, keep going. I'm not going to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, I mean, it's really not that interesting. I knew I wanted to get out of Florida. Florida for me is such a dark place. And I knew that I just needed to get out of there. I came back to New York for the first time in 10 years, and I saw one of my old guy friends, and he looked at me and he was like, what are you doing? You don't belong there. Come back here. And I think within a month, I
got back.
I was back. Yeah.
And I want to talk a little bit about that period, especially you mentioned earlier the fact that like you went from broke to a job. And I kind of want to give some context around that, just to let people in a little bit. So what kind of work were you doing in New York when you first started?
I think just like retail. Retail jobs. Yeah.
And where were you living? Were you living like with a bunch of roommates, or how did you make ends meet?
Yeah. Yeah. I had a bunch of roommates out in Queens.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. So it's like the true New York story of just moving here with $20 in your pocket and figuring it out.
Yeah.
Wow. You talked about the fact that, the sexual abuse was something that just kind of carried on with you throughout. And, I kind of want to use this as an opportunity to allow you to speak to the listeners out there who might be going through something similar with regards to their past not necessarily going away under similar circumstances. Then, I don't know if you feel like you're in a position to speak to people now, but if you are, please, what kind of words of either guidance or comfort would you give to someone who's in the position you were in while you were, for instance, working in Grand Central, going through what you were going through?
I think like the most powerful thing is there's so many people who have lived through this. And I think that's really the most powerful thing is like finding people that you can share your story with. And I say that with trepidation because there's been science studies that show when people share their stories and they're met with an adverse reaction, they experience a secondary trauma that makes them never want to share again.
Yeah.
But I think knowing that there are so many people out there is the one thing that I can offer solace. I think every story is so unique, and I don't know that I used to really say like, it happened so long ago, it doesn't affect who I am. When I signed up for this documentary, that was like, it's not a part of my identity. I do not want to be the sexual abuse girl. But it's still ever present, I'm here trying to tell my story to you. And it's hard because I'm still trying to protect everybody else who's also been harmed by it, So in a lot of ways, you move out of it, but in a lot of ways, it stays with you forever. And so I think really just finding people and knowing that you aren't alone is so important in almost every circumstance.
I appreciate you sharing that with me. And I'm sure that's going to really reverberate with a lot of the listeners out there who are reflecting on this right now, to your point, this isn't what defines you. There's a lot more to your story. I think this was a part of your story that set things off and maybe gave you the ammo to pursue more. And, you had mentioned to me your experience after you had gutted out those years of your career and rose the ranks with the limitations you faced once you came upon an executive board opportunity. Mm-hmm. And I think this is an important transition right now because to a lot of the listeners out there, it was really important to start this off by sharing Sara's background. But I really want you to hone in now and kind of realize and learn how the story, has a life that continues to live on, and it lived on with every step thereafter. So let's talk about what happened there.
Again, in a lot of ways, I got lucky. I worked for a man who really saw potential in me and really believed in me and invested in me. And so he kept putting me in higher and higher leadership positions, and eventually ended up on an executive board. But the problem with that is not everybody believed in me in the same way. And I was really met with that resistance over and over again. I, was one of very few women, definitely the only one without a college degree, let alone a master's, from an Ivy League school. And there had been some shifts in the company. At this point, I was convinced I was going to spend the rest of my life at this company. And the CEO, who I was really close to and really invested in me and had my back, was getting more away from the day-to-day operations. And he really wanted me to work with a CFO that they had just brought on from Silicon Valley. And it was really here that I was like, it's just not going to go well. He was a tech guy. When we did my annual salary review, he looked at me and said, "You better be thankful that I don't put all of your qualities and qualifications into a spreadsheet and base your salary
off of that." What a jerk.
Yeah. And
what kind of company was this? This was in the retail industry?
No, this is in the physical therapy space.
Got it. Okay.
And they hired this isn't a guy who was within the company. They brought him in from the outside, and had I known he wasn't going to make it another 3 months there, I probably would have stayed. But at the time I was like, this guy's not going anywhere, and he's the CFO. So what choices do I have? He's saying to me, you aren't worth it. And I was like that kid at the airport again with $20 in my pocket, no one is going to save you. No one is going to come at the end of the day and make it nice for you. So my back's against the wall. What am I going to do? And this was 2 days before I had a planned vacation. And I spent the entire planned vacation just grieving this loss that I
built up for.
Yeah. And I'm in my early 30s. I have built this career. I have shown what I am capable of, and I am still fighting to just be paid equally and fairly. And I'm so tired of fighting. I just want to walk into a room and someone see me and value me for who I am as in my current existence, Yeah. I just how can you bring a family into that situation? You can't, and so I was just I'm so tired of having to constantly convince people that I'm valuable. I don't want to do it anymore. And if getting a college degree is what is going to clear that barrier or that bias for me, then that's what I'm going to do, because I'm not going to allow it to be a weakness for me anymore. And I came back and I was like, I'm going to school. And that was really it, that was really it.
I mean, this hits home with me on so many levels because in almost all corporate arenas and in any kind of profession, a lot of times people do come across this situation where other people place a value on you. And it's really important to remember that if anyone's placing a value on you, 100% of the time, they're going to undervalue you. It's not even 99% of the time or 99.9% of the time. 100% of the time, they are going to undervalue you. And it's extremely important that, as individuals, we do what we can to remind ourselves and to keep our value intact. And, I've come across this countless times personally in the corporate world where you just need to say no, no, like this is what I'm worth. Like you don't tell me what I'm worth. I'm going to tell you what I'm worth. And I say this because I want you to know that even without the college degree, you're worth a lot more. And that's the thing that I think. As a society and the way that a lot of these institutions have been built. And, I'm talking on such a broad lens because this applies to so many places on so many different levels in so many different industries in different types of institutions. And it's not just even the corporate world, it's the private sector. It's everywhere out there where people need to realize that they have no right to put a value on other human beings. And, your hurt is coming from a place and it's very understandable. But this is something that just transcends, this one conversation. This is something that goes to everybody out there who at one point has felt lesser than somebody else because of something that was outside of their control. Whether it was a certain condition that they have, whether it was the family that they were born into, whether it was their financial situation, whether it was just their background or their identity or, their preference. And so I want to tell you that you sharing that is extremely powerful on so many levels. And I want to make sure we don't skip this point. And, if you're a business leader out there listening to this show, I want you to be extremely cognizant of this conversation in particular, because people like Sara and people who have felt undermined for, different reasons in their lives, they will come out and they will come out stronger than you could ever imagine. And there's going to be a day where someone like Sara is going to be telling you that you're the one that's not qualified for whatever it is that you want to do. And so that's the end of my rant. But this is a topic that is extremely important to me and something that I think should never, go untouched. And for some reason, I don't know why, but it keeps coming up over and over and over and over again. So now you decide to go back to school. At this point, did you know that you wanted to pursue medicine, or were you just going back to get a degree at this point?
Well, first of all, I just want to say I'm so glad that was recorded because I'm definitely going to replay that for myself later in life when I'm having a bad day. But the original ambition, just because so much of my work had been focused on teaching people how to communicate, teaching people how to lean into difficult conversations, because you have to do that in business. If you are a leader in business and people feel like you aren't giving them the truth or aren't being authentic, they will not buy into you. And so I really just spent so much of my later career just developing people and teaching these things that I was like, you know what, I'm going to go get my PhD in clinical psychology. But there was a point in time where I just said, you know what, I'm already doing it. I'm already going for it. And I would always say to my friends, in the next lifetime, the next time I'm born into a different family, I would be a doctor. And I was just like, you're already taking a jump, just leap a little further, because you're already in the midst of the scary part. And so that's when I really decided that I was just going to go for it and be a doctor, because I think I just want to care for my community. And that's really, when I think of caring for my community, that's what I think of. And so that's what I aspire to become.
I love that, that taking that like one little step further, or that one extra leap. I think that a lot of times we tend to undervalue our own potential sometimes, especially when you think about it contextually in terms of what we've overcome. Like, like you've already overcome so much to begin with. And every time you get to a new level, you expect like that's your cap. There's like no way you can go any higher than that. And the more and more you do it, the more you realize, all right, you got to stop having that conversation with yourself about your cap, because your cap doesn't really exist. I can relate to that myself personally on certain accords, but kudos to you for getting there when you did. I mean, look, you look at your story sometimes, and the way that you've shared it with me, and kind of reading it, and you kind of point out the fact that you feel, or that even realistically, at age-wise, you're older than some of your fellow students.
Oh, yeah.
But the truth of the matter is that, like, they didn't go through what you went through. You are so much more resilient than your peers. You have so much more experience than your peers, and so this is one of those things that, like, age is a number, but there's so much value in the fact that you're doing it when you're doing it. And perhaps there is a little bit of destiny behind that with regards to why you are where you are. So after you decide to go back to school, you had mentioned to me that you have your own disabilities that we haven't talked about. So maybe let's talk about those and how those maybe impacted your education.
Yeah. So, I mean, I did what I always did, which is I started from the bottom, and I climbed my way to the top. Talk about, pit to peak. But, I started at a community college because that's the only place I could start. I never took an SAT and never took a language course. So I started at a community college, and I don't know who needs to hear this, but community college classes are excellent. And if you are even the slight bit curious, like, do it, because those professors teach in a way that is really from a passion that does not exist in higher, more stuffy institutions. But then I got accepted into Columbia, and
just casually dropping that in there. Then she got accepted into Columbia. I'm going to take a second to give you a little clap there. So then she got accepted into Columbia. What made you even think of applying to Columbia at that point?
Well, I mean, you kind of mentioned, like, watch out for Sarah because she's going to come swinging one day. And that's at my job. That's where we'd always try to recruit from, was Columbia. Like, Columbia was the, golden standard. But also, you talk about self-love, and like, I wanted that for myself. I really wanted to feel like I deserved that I deserved access to that. And now I genuinely feel that everybody should have access to those kinds of places. Yeah. But I really just wanted that for myself, that achievement. And so when I got accepted, it was absolutely one of the best days of my entire life.
Which, by the way, I don't want to go on a side note, but I believe it was Columbia. Oh, I feel like one of the Ivy Leagues recently came out and said they're no longer looking at SAT and ACT scores for, except, was it Columbia or no? It was a different.
They're still looking. No, but that is the trend, and I do hope that it continues.
Yeah.
I do think it's a little bit of propaganda because they still ask for your SAT scores, but they're trying to do a more holistic approach.
Got it.
But yeah, I do hope that wave absolutely continues.
Got it. Sorry, I did not mean to cut you off there.
No, it's totally fine. And then when I got to Columbia and started pre-med, it's basically where everything exploded. Just everything exploded. My first semester there, is when the pandemic hit. And, we talk about me being alone as a kid. I have never felt more alone in my entire life. I am an older student who does not come from money, whose parents are not doctors, who have, disabilities. I was in a statistics course and they used the example of the median SAT score of the accepted student at Columbia. The median SAT score is in the top 1%, which means that there's higher than that and there's lower than that.
Yeah.
And these classes, it's not like you do the work and you get an A. It is the top 20% of students are applicable for A's.
Yeah.
And the percentage cut after that. And so, it's just all of these things that just really compounded and broke me. I am taking out these loans in my 30s. I'm jeopardizing not only my financial future, but my family's financial future. And everybody's banking on me to make it. And I'm participating in this program that banks on you not to make it. It's, they just released a study that showed, an example of 100 students who start pre-med, and of the 100 who started, 16 of them complete the coursework. And of the 16, 7 got accepted into med schools.
For the record, I was one of the 84. So I was pre-med for a whole year in college. So I totally get it.
But what it did is it brought to light a larger conversation for me, which was, here's this profession that is established to care for the public. And yet we have people in these positions that do not represent the public. 75% of first-year med students come from the top 2 income brackets in the country. We have doctors prescribing medicine to people, and they've never known what it's like to not be able to afford the medicine they're prescribing. Like, in 2019, the New England Journal of Medicine compared the racism in medicine killing as many people as racism in policing. Like, it's a big problem. And so I felt like I am this tiny person with all these things that I'm bringing to the table that are stacked against me: dyslexia, slower cognition speeds. I'm older, and I'm going against this ginormous system that is built to not have people like me make it. And it just felt impossible. And it just broke me, because all of these things that I had told myself for surviving everything that I've been through, that it's like, I used to always tell myself, I had this mantra. I was like, no matter what happens to you, you will always survive. And now that mantra didn't apply anymore. I'm spending 18 hours a day studying indoors, and I'm failing these tests, and I'm getting these signs from school, from people, from colleagues. 2 weeks ago, I got laughed at in class. Like, it's hitting me from every angle. Like, you don't belong here. And it's hard to, after 2 years, to not internalize that, to say, maybe those things are true. Like, how hard and for how long do you buck against the system before you realize, like, maybe the feedback you're getting is true? And so it really spiraled me.
Yeah. I mean, I hear you. I mean, a all as you're talking, all I'm thinking about, the system sucks. The
Yeah.
system is a piece of shit. The system sucks. And it kind of it goes across the board again. It, the system needs so much refining, and whatever system that is to whoever is listening out there, um, and I struggle with this a lot because I find myself rebelling against the system and wanting to be a proponent for change.
Mm.
But then when you get yourself into a room of people who are supposed to be championing the change, a lot of times you just find yourself surrounded by the system again. And then all of a sudden it's like, this isn't where I wanted to be. But I think what you should do, and what I've learned to do, is to use the system for your advantage. Let it get you where you need to go. And then after that, you're free. It's the whole idea of, and this is a little different for you, but maybe for other people out there, it's that whole idea of using your 9 to 5 to fund your fund to 5 to 9. And then ultimately using that 5 to 9 to raise enough to get out of your 9 to 5. And that's how it works in the corporate world when it comes to, gaming the system. In your world, it's definitely a little bit different, but my experience has taught me that it's okay to want to fight the system.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you need to remain grounded and make sure you have good boundaries with it. Otherwise, it will break you. The system can break you. It will. I could do a whole episode on this quote unquote system, and how it could absolutely, shake a human down and bring them down to nothing and make them want to walk away from everything and give up on all their hopes and dreams and desires and feel absolutely worthless because, a couple people who don't know any better were taught like that this is what is valuable and this is not valuable. And so, I appreciate you sharing that. I want to talk a little bit about how you decided to turn the corner on maybe that pit of despair.
Mm. Well, before we move on, I just want to say something in response to you. And I think one of the most important things that I've learned from this whole process is, at this point, I've spent years studying the brain and studying psychology and emotions. And as a society, we really lean away from things like that we deem negative emotions like anger. And I think that anger can be such a powerful emotion. And I really think as a society, we need to learn to embrace it. But it's a spectrum, right? You need enough anger to fuel you to keep going, to recognize that there's an injustice, because without anger, we won't change anything, right? Like, we don't change anything in complacency. We change things because we're enraged by them. But there's also a point where it becomes a chip on your shoulder, and then it starts to weigh you down and it's no longer serving you. And so I really had to find that balance of like, where's the anger of, like, I call it like DJ Khaled myself, like they don't want you to make it, they don't want you to have a swimming pool, like the appropriate anger where it's like, I recognize what's happening to me. I'm not reframing it because that wouldn't serve me, because that's the reality. They don't want me to make it, but that's the anger that pushes me to want to make it. But at the same time, not being so lost in resentment that I can't move forward with my own progress. And so I just think that that's important.
That is very important. I'm really glad that you shared that and put it out there. I think it's absolutely spot on with regards to just that balance that's so necessary. So thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm. As far as the change, so I was like deep in my depression. And I saw a post on Instagram from Heidi, whom I've known from, gyms in New York City and the CrossFit world. And she posted something about like this documentary she was doing to a climb for Mount Kilimanjaro. And I just knew immediately that I needed to do it. And I was terrified. Like, I didn't want to look up anything about Mount Kilimanjaro because I knew it was going to give me an actual panic attack. But I knew that I needed to do it at the same time because I had been living in such a state of disassociation for so long. You know, during this depression, I gained weight. I would look at myself in the mirror and I could not see myself in my face. And then I would go to school and I would receive feedback and have feelings and thoughts about myself that I also did not recognize. And so I was living in this constant state of internal chaos where I was like, I just need to know one way or the other. Like, am I this person who survived all of this stuff, who has incredible resilience and grit? Or am I this other person that I've been introduced to who's inept and weak and stupid and, you know, can't take care of herself? Like, what a disgrace. You're in your 30s and you can barely wash your face once a day. I really needed to know definitively who I was, and I couldn't move on until I knew that. Because if I was this resilient person, then I could put this other thing into context and know that, like, this is what's happening at school, but it's not who I am entirely. And if this is true, then at least I can go back to work and rebuild on this person. But I needed to know, and I just needed like an outside thing to show me.
You know, it's interesting. I love that you decided to do the climb, and it reminds me of really how I got to mile 40. Like I needed to make this crazy decision. I needed to do this crazy decision to do something that I hadn't ever done before. And I think that sometimes when you think about these events of endurance, and kudos to you, because I mean, look, in my opinion, climbing Mount Kilimanjaro is a much wilder accomplishment than doing an Ironman, which is what I did, and that's how I got to my moment. And I need to ask you, because I feel like a lot of times people don't really understand what's going through our minds when we're seeking out this clarity. I remember telling people in my situation that I signed up for this Ironman. It was the scariest thing that I had ever done. I had no idea why I was doing it. People kept asking me, why are you doing it? I didn't have an answer for them. I knew I needed to do it. And like, I knew I had to be like totally locked in mentally and emotionally. And I knew that like there was going to be something about doing this race that was going to unleash a potential that I was kind of holding on to for a long time. I didn't know how it was going to come out. I didn't ever imagine it to come out the way that it did, where I found myself at the 40th mile, you know, completely dehydrated, salt all over my skin, everybody running past me and completely alone. And that was the moment that changed everything for me, where all of a sudden I was like, you can finish this. And like, I just basically in my head, time transcended. All of a sudden I was thinking of the younger version of Bishoy, what he went through. And then I powered through to finish the last 30 miles. And now I had a story to tell. That was my story. And it wasn't, I'm saying that because I see so much of that in your story. And I'm wondering, did you have the similar feelings leading up to the climb? And then while you were out on the climb, did you have like kind of this like moment of like, holy shit, if I could do this, I could do anything, and no one in this world and no system and no rules are going to break me?
Yes. And also, like, your story just gave me like full on body goosebumps. But I guess that's like why we do these stories.
That's why we do this. That's why we do these things. And like, I do like truly see such a parallel where there's that buildup and there's that knowledge of, I am worth more and I can do more. And I'm going to do something crazy just to show myself that like, I'm not being foolish about this. And so that way, like, no one can ever say that I don't belong in this room ever again, or that I don't belong on this stage, or that like, I don't deserve this value. And so let's talk about the climb itself now. So tell us about what happened leading up to it, the preparation, and if you have any highlights.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I did this in the lowest point of my life, honestly. I have generally always been an athlete, and, take care of myself. And I just had been broken. And I signed up for this thing. We got, the green light that this was really happening. And I remember walking to the gym for the first time. My apartment's on 28th. It was on 42nd. So I had to cross like this mini mountain on 34th Street, like if you know, you know.
Yeah.
And it's not a big deal. But for me, I couldn't even walk up this hill without taking a break. Like that's how far gone I was to the other side. And I remember thinking like, holy crap, what did I sign myself up for? But like you said, I also knew that like if I signed myself up for it, I was going to do it. And this was going to force me to take care of myself in a way that I wouldn't otherwise accommodate. I if I signed up for climbing a mountain, I can't dip out last minute of climbing a mountain. And so I knew that it was going to force me to put my health in a priority that I hadn't been doing the last 2 years. And so that's what I did. I went to the gym, I did sprints, I did deadlifts, I did, thousands of box step ups with weighted backpacks. And and it was isolating again in the group because we're all chatting and, chatting to get to know each other. We had never met each other in person, and they're all just like, yeah, man, I'm super amped. Like, this is going to be the time of our lives. And here I am, like this shell of a human being being like, I'm effing terrified. Like, what are you guys so excited about? Like, do you not have an ounce, obviously they have humility, but at the time I'm like, do not have an ounce of humility to think that this is not going to be terrible, at certain points, because it's going to be terrible at certain points. And so I really felt again, like I was an outsider. And I know now that I know those girls and what we've been through, that much of that was what I was bringing to the table and how I was viewing things. When you're a hammer, all you see is a nail. But we flew, we got there. I had prepared all I could possibly prepare. And the day that we leave, I got my period, which is only pertinent for the fact that I'm in immense physical pain. And I'm now sick. I cannot keep things in my body. And we're leaving the hotel to go to this mountain. And they like the starting point, you all have a lunch. And I'm like, I can't eat this lunch because we haven't even started yet and I'm already sick. And I remember sending a text message to my family being like, we're about to leave. This is my last text message to you. I do not feel well. I don't know how this is going to go.
Oh my God.
Which in hindsight is a horrible text message to send to your family.
Text message to
Do
send out.
not do that.
That's how you leave people terrified for you.
But yeah, I mean, it was a rocky. And again, I was like, this is the universe telling me, like, I do not have what it takes. I was sick the entire duration of that climb.
Wow.
The entire duration.
How long was it?
7, 8 days, 7, 8, 9 days, something like that.
Yeah.
And at some points I was really, really struggling because you need to eat. You're burning a lot of calories.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't, it was not appetizing to me. And when I did eat, it didn't bode well for me. But the people there are so amazing. Like, it is just another kind of human beings there, who genuinely care so much about you and care about your success so much that, of course, there are moments where like I just cried because I was so physically exhausted and I was mentally exhausted. And they would just look me in the face and be like, we got you, just take the next step. And the night before summit night, they switched my medication, the altitude medication, to see if that was what was making me sick.
Yeah.
And Heidi played videos for us of like recordings from our family, and that was great. But my husband wrote me a letter, and I didn't read it until right before we left for summit. And he just said everything that I needed to hear. And he was like, "You are a mutter horse. You are a mutter horse. Like when the conditions are bad and it's rainy and it's sloppy, all the like glamorous, fancy horses, they fall apart. And that's where you thrive, is when it's gritty and messy." And that was like what I needed to hear. And so the entire 12, 13 hours that we summited this mountain, I just kept my head down and kept saying, "You're a mutter horse, you're a mutter horse, you're a mutter horse." And we made it, we made it.
I truly believe that people like you are the most powerful humans in the world. And I say that in all sincerity, but in all truth, I do believe that if every organization out there was run by someone like you, if every country out there was run by someone like you, if every team out there was run by someone like you, we'd be living in a much, much, much better world. And I'm really taken back by your journey to the summit, and I'm just so glad that you're here and that you've shared this all. It does mean a lot. Like in your own world, in your own words, going up there to reveal who you really were. Was she the resilient little girl who survived all the horrible things in her past, or was she the inept, weak, and unintelligent person who now resided in a body she didn't recognize? And I think we all know the answer to that question. Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you want to make sure that our audience knows about you or your journey? I think it's a beautiful way to end with you at the top of Mount Kilimanjaro, but I want to make sure the floor is yours. So if there's anything else out there that you want people to kind of walk away after hearing, Sara speak, please feel free to opine.
I just think that it's important to remind people that, while stories are super important, I think it's natural, like, that we want to compare ourselves so that we can internalize it. And I just want to remind people that, like, there's so many pit and peaks. And while this is a small peak, I'm very much in the middle of my pit. I'm very much in the middle of my grind. And right now it is the endurance sport. Right now it is keep your head down and say what you need to say so that you make it to the other side. And so, I don't know, I think people sometimes feel like they're missing something because they haven't had that peak yet. Or maybe they've been in the pit for so long, they've just been grinding for so long. And I just want to like normalize that for people, because that's how it feels for me. And I think everyone should be on a podcast because you've celebrated me in a way that I don't know that I'm deserving of. But I think that's probably human nature, is that we value other people's stories a lot more than our own. And so I guess I just want to remind people to value your own story.
Absolutely. There's no better way to close this off. And, I think you're spot on. At the end of the day, there is no end game, right? Like, you're going to continue climbing for the rest of your life, as we all are. And your story is just a reflection of the capabilities of humankind. And I really, really do appreciate it again. And I just want to say thank you for coming on. And, I feel very, very grateful that you were able to share with us today. Thank you.